River Somme, flowing through the peaceful Somme Valley in northern France. So peaceful, one can almost forget what happened here. But locals will tell you, on damp days you can still smell the rust in the air, from the shells, bullets, and barbed wire embedded in what is blood-soaked soil. For the Somme will forever be the graveyard of armies.
In this little valley, more than 24,000 Canadians were killed or wounded, just in this little valley. And this is the nature of the Somme fighting again. This is just just push forward, push back, failed attack after failed attack, a little bit of success. It was really a slaughterhouse. This was an unbelievable slaughterhouse.
July 1916, Sir Douglas Haig, the British commander-in-chief, a stubborn cavalry officer, surprises his generals. He decides upon a dangerous gamble to break the deadlock that has reigned along the battle line stretching from Switzerland to the North Sea, the battle line known as the Western Front. Since the Allies foiled the German invasion of France in 1914, France alone has done most of the fighting. Now drained of men and on the verge of collapse, France puts pressure on Britain's top general. Haig responds and launches the largest British offensive ever against German positions on the ridges overlooking the Somme.
Artillery fire of a hitherto unimagined intensity rolled and thundered on our front, and thousands of twitching flashes turned the western horizon into a sea of flowers. We knew we were on the verge this time of a battle such as the world had never seen.
The young German soldier, huddling deep in his bunker that June morning, could not know how true his words would be. After 8 days of unceasing bombardment, British guns fall silent at 7:30 in the morning, July the 1st, 1916. 120,000 volunteers go over the top, and General Haig's Battle of the Somme begins. Ordered forward at a walking pace, the men have no way of knowing that their artillery bombardment has failed. In the time it takes to go for a short stroll, tens of thousands of young Britons fall under a hail of bullets. Crouching in a second line of British trenches, waiting their turn, are 700 men from Britain's oldest colony, Newfoundland, not yet part of Canada. An hour after the initial assault, communications have broken down. Confusion is total. And thinking the attack is going well, Haig's officers order the Newfoundlanders forward.
This is Newfoundland Memorial Park at Beaumont-Hamel. It's the best preserved battlefield of the First World War. It actually preserves all the battlefield of 1916, particularly where the Newfoundlanders were chopped up on July 1st. You get an incredible view from over here. Well, the Newfoundlanders attacked over this little piece of land here. They suffered about 90% casualties. More than 300 were killed, that's out of 700 that went into the attack. But they were all killed in this little parcel of land between where we're standing and that tree over there. They never even got through the barbed wire. The first segment of the attack, which took place over these trenches, had failed completely. But the general got reports that there were some British troops in the German wire and who got into the German trenches. So they decided to order the Newfoundlanders forward, who were about, probably 200 yards behind us. And they had to work their way through these trenches with dead and wounded and the complete chaos of the whole morning catastrophe ahead of them. So they walked through here, and they basically didn't know where they were going. It gets quiet because all the fighting has died down, and they climb out of these trenches and start their walk, because they were walking because they're carrying so much equipment, towards the Germans across no man's land. No man's land wasn't safe at all, and to be even less safe in the time to come, because there was no other fighting on the flanks, so everything was quiet. Anyone who came out of the trenches at this point was the only guy the Germans were going to focus on, and that's exactly what happened to the Newfoundlanders. They started to get through the barbed wire entanglements, and you can still see some of the corkscrew stakes over there. They start to work their way across, and of course, the German artillery, which is on all these ridges, all these machine guns down here are just peppering these guys, and they're dropping one after the other after the other. By the time they clear the British barbed wire, they go about another 50 meters, and they're all gone.
Of the Newfoundlanders, General Beauvoir de Lisle said, "It was a magnificent display of valor, and only failed because dead men can advance no further." The slaughtered Newfoundlanders have become part of the bloodiest day in 1,000 years of British history. 60,000 casualties in a few hours, and hardly any ground gained. Unperturbed, Sir Douglas Haig declares the fight will continue, and it does, for another 5 months. By September, more than 100,000 young men lie buried on the Somme. General Haig looks north to Belgium, and to the 3 Canadian divisions who've been fighting in Ypres for more than a year. A year before, in April 1915, Canada's army of businessmen, bookkeepers, salesmen, and students had confronted the first large-scale gas attack in history. It was their first battle. Too naive to retreat, they stood their ground, saved the city of Ypres, and built a reputation as fierce fighters. With the Canadians is a 53-year-old Anglican minister from Quebec City, Canon Frederick Scott, who, contemptuous of risk and disobeying orders, has smuggled himself into the front line.
Rumors began to circulate that we Canadians were to go south, and the signs of the approaching pilgrimage began to manifest themselves. One did hope that the attack to the south would be the beginning of the end, and that peace would be restored to the shattered world.
Also hearing the rumors is a tough, cynical Scot from Calgary, Alberta, Private Donald Fraser, who, like many Canadian soldiers, excels at stripping souvenirs from the bodies of dead Germans.
It became known our destination was the Somme. Our major informed us that we would have a pretty easy time, as our artillery had threats well in hand, pulverizing his lines so completely that the advance would practically be a walkover, and the wounds would be such that they'd only mean a nice little trip home. He seemed to believe the story himself, but it turned out quite different, the major himself being one of the first to fall.
Ordered south, it takes a week for Canada's 3 divisions, 60,000 men, to march from Ypres to what the Germans have come to call the bloodbath of the Somme. With each step closer to shell-shattered Albert, Private Fraser and his company see more and more signs of what is to come.
The day was hot, and we sweltered as we crept up the hilly road. One was amazed at the German entrenchments in this sector. The ground was honeycombed with deep dugouts and machine gun emplacements. We passed the remains of a German cemetery, and on the road, I stepped on the body of a Hun embedded in the soil. In Albert, which has received to date a fair amount of shelling, the Madonna and Child on the top of the cathedral spire are hanging over and swinging with the wind. The French claim that when they drop, the war will be over.
One of the big superstitions of the First World War concerned the Golden Virgin at the top of this cathedral. It had been damaged from shelling, and it had fallen at a 45-degree angle, falling down towards us. And the superstitious people of the time, which was everybody, considered the fact that if it fell, then the war would end, which in most cases meant the Germans would win. So the French engineers decided they would fix fate, and they strapped it on so that the whole statue laid at this angle, but was still secured and wouldn't fall. Canadian troops came through here in 1916, and everybody, every memoir, every soldier who was here remembers the Leaning Virgin, and it's in absolutely every memoir.
It seemed to me as if there was something appropriate in the strange position the statue now occupied. For as the battalions marched past the church, it looked as if they were receiving a parting benediction from the infant Savior. Canon Frederick Scott.
Well, the men were very superstitious, and you can understand why. One shell would kill one guy one day and not kill the other guy the next. Some men knew that they were going to die, and they would go into a battle, even a light action, and sort of give away their goods or get their letters home, and they would always die. They seemed to have a premonition. On one hand, you could live, and on the other hand, you could die. And what makes the difference between the two of them? Just a twist of fate. So I think that's what really, really holds them to their superstitious beliefs. And I think every soldier had one, and I think this is true of the First World War or the Second World War or any war. We're just in the village of Auvillers near La Boiselle, and it's in these fields beside us that the Canadian troops were moving up for the attack on September the 15th, 1916. All the men of the 2nd Division were marching up through this area, and what was interesting about it is every time they passed a ridge, the battle got worse. They were in Albert, and it was not too badly damaged, but war was there, and then they'd pass the first ridge, and they'd find more shell holes and more bodies, and by the time they got into this valley here, it was total destruction. They were amazed by the depth of the German defenses and the number of bodies that were unburied and laying around the area. The problem was they still had one more ridge to go at Pozieres, where the whole thing would get that much worse.
Every hour of the day, a steady stream of troops were passing between La Boiselle and Pozieres, bringing up rations, material, and ammunitions. A continuous queue of wounded were being brought down to the dressing stations, and pioneers were busy burying the dead in the new cemeteries springing up.
Arriving in the rubble of Pozieres, Private Fraser and his company learned that it has taken Australian troops 7 weeks and 23,000 casualties to fight their way brick by brick into the ruined village. Now to be the Canadian jumping-off point for the next phase of the Battle of the Somme.
As we lay there in the darkness, the mind had every opportunity to run riot. One of our tough guys, Thibault, took a very serious religious view of things, going so far as to say that he knew he was going to get it. His premonition turned out correct. He was dead in no man's land a few hours later.
The Somme, September 15th, 1916. Private Donald Fraser is just one of 30,000 Canadian soldiers waiting for the dawn. Part of a planned assault along a 13-kilometer front, the Canadians' job is to attack Sugar Trench, Candy Trench, and the fortified sugar refinery, all of which shield the Germans' next position, the fortified village of Courcelette.